The desert sun beat down on Alara's back, hotter than any fire she'd ever known. Dust devils danced in the distance, mocking her with their fleeting freedom. She stood with other women, heads bowed, trying to disappear into the drab fabric of their dresses. They were all for sale, not in a fancy store with pretty ribbons, but like cattle, ready to be inspected and branded. Alara didn't look like much. Her clothes were worn, her face smudged with dirt. Most saw a quiet, obedient girl, easily overlooked. But behind those tired eyes, a sharp mind worked constantly, calculating, observing, planning. She'd learned early that survival depended on being underestimated. She'd spent her life listening, watching, learning the secrets whispered in shadows. She wasn't born to this life. Once, she dreamed of books in faraway cities, not dust and despair. But fate, cruel as a desert wind, had ripped her dreams away, leaving her orphaned and penniless. Now, she was a commodity, a prize to be won or lost. A gruff voice cut through the air. Next, a thick hand shoved Alara forward. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell. Before her stood Jedediah Stone, a mountain of a man with a face like granite. His eyes, cold and hard, scanned her up and down. He reeked of sweat and whiskey. "Name," he grunted. "Alara," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. Stone circled her, his gaze predatory. He poked her arm, as if checking the quality of meat. Alara suppressed a shiver. She knew what he saw, a skinny, unremarkable girl. He couldn't see the fire that burned within, the intelligence that simmered beneath the surface. That was her advantage. "She'll do," Stone declared, his voice final. He tossed a bag of coins to the man in charge, a transaction as cold and impersonal as death. Alara was no longer her own. She belonged to Jedediah Stone. Her desperate situation had begun. But little did he know, he hadn't bought a simple ranch hand. He'd bought a storm. The ride to Stone's ranch was a blur of dust and jolting wagon wheels. Alara clung to the side, her stomach churning. The landscape grew increasingly desolate, the promise of civilization fading with every mile. Finally, the ranch came into view, a cluster of rough-hewn buildings baking under the relentless sun. It was less a home and more a prison. Stone's ranch was called Stone Creek, though there wasn't a creek in sight, only a dry, cracked riverbed. The buildings were ramshackle, the fences broken, the animals gaunt and overworked. The air hung thick with the smell of sweat, manure, and simmering resentment. Life on Stone Creek was brutal. Days began before sunrise and ended long after dark. Alara, along with the other women, was assigned to the most grueling tasks: hauling water, mending fences, cooking meager meals, and tending to the endless laundry. Stone demanded absolute obedience and punished even the smallest infraction with harsh words or a brutal beating. The food was scarce and tasteless, mostly beans and hardtack, occasionally supplemented with stringy beef. Sleep was a luxury, stolen in short snatches on straw-filled mattresses in a crowded bunkhouse. Privacy was non-existent. The women were constantly watched, their every move scrutinized. Stone himself was a constant presence, a looming shadow that cast a pall over everything. He took pleasure in their suffering, finding entertainment in their fear. He ruled through intimidation, his word law. He was a tyrant in his own small kingdom, and his subjects lived in constant dread. Alara quickly learned the rules of survival. Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your eyes open. She worked tirelessly, enduring the hardships without complaint. But beneath her outward compliance, her mind was always working, always planning. She was a prisoner, yes, but a prisoner with a purpose. She would not break. She would not be defeated. She would find a way to turn Stone's cruelty against him. The harsh conditions of the ranch only fueled her resolve, hardening her like the desert stone. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Alara became a fixture on Stone Creek, indistinguishable from the other women in her worn dress and calloused hands. But while others succumbed to despair, Alara used her time to observe. She became a shadow, unnoticed and ever-present. She listened to Stone's conversations with his foreman, piecing together the details of his cattle drives, his land deals, and his less-than-legal activities. She learned who he trusted, who he feared, and who he owed. She discovered that Stone's power wasn't as absolute as he pretended. He had debts, enemies, and secrets that could bring him crashing down. She noticed the way Stone treated his foreman, a man named Silas, with a mixture of respect and thinly veiled contempt. She overheard arguments between Stone and a wealthy landowner named Mrs. Abernathy about water rights. She saw the furtive meetings Stone held with a shifty-eyed gambler from a nearby town. Alara also learned about Stone's weaknesses. He was vain, arrogant, and easily flattered. He had a weakness for whiskey and a roving eye for the younger women on the ranch. He believed himself to be invincible, and that arrogance was his greatest vulnerability. She also discovered a hidden ledger in Stone's office, detailing all his illicit dealings. Bribes paid to corrupt officials, stolen cattle sold for profit, and even evidence of a murder he'd gotten away with years ago. This ledger was a goldmine of information, a weapon she could use against him when the time was right. Alara carefully cataloged everything she learned, storing it away in the recesses of her sharp mind. She knew that knowledge was power, and she was slowly accumulating the power she needed to take control. She was patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless in her pursuit of information. Stone saw a docile servant. She was a spider weaving a web, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The secrets she unearthed would become the foundation of her plan, the stepping stones on her path to revenge. The dust had barely settled from a particularly brutal cattle drive when Stone fell ill. One day he was bellowing orders, the next he was writhing in his bed, clutching his stomach. The ranch hands whispered about bad whiskey or a curse from a disgruntled worker. Alara knew better. She had carefully replaced Stone's nightly whiskey with a concoction of herbs she'd learned about from a traveling medicine woman. Herbs that, in the right dose, could mimic the symptoms of a severe illness and ultimately be fatal. The process was slow, subtle, and untraceable. Suspicion immediately fell on Alara. After all, she was the one who prepared Stone's meals and drinks. Silas, the foreman, questioned her harshly, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Did you put something in his drink, girl?" he demanded. "Did you try to poison him?" Alara met his gaze, her face an innocent mask. "Why would I do that, Silas?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Stone has always been good to me." And here was the alibi, meticulously crafted. Alara had spent weeks subtly befriending Mrs. Abernathy, the wealthy landowner who frequently visited Stone to discuss business. On the night Stone first fell ill, Alara had innocently mentioned to Mrs. Abernathy that she was worried about Stone's drinking. Later that night, she made sure Mrs. Abernathy saw her preparing Stone's usual whiskey, substituting it with the doctored drink when she wasn't looking. Mrs. Abernathy, believing Alara to be genuinely concerned, corroborated her story. She testified that she had indeed seen Alara preparing Stone's drink and that Alara had expressed concern about his health. Alara had successfully deflected suspicion, using her perceived innocence and the unwitting assistance of another. Stone lingered for days, his body ravaged by the slow-acting poison. Finally, with a final gasp, he was gone. His death was ruled an accident, a tragic consequence of his hard-living lifestyle. But Alara knew the truth. She had orchestrated his demise, carefully and methodically, and she had gotten away with it. The game had begun, and she was ready to play. Stone's death was like kicking over an anthill. Chaos erupted. Silas, the foreman, immediately declared himself the rightful heir, citing his years of loyal service. Mrs. Abernathy, smelling opportunity, arrived with lawyers, claiming Stone owed her a significant sum and demanding control of a valuable portion of the ranch as collateral. The shifty-eyed gambler, a man named Deuce Calhoun, showed up with a forged document claiming Stone had lost the ranch to him in a poker game. Each faction was greedy, ruthless, and convinced of their own superiority. Alara watched from the sidelines, a silent observer in the brewing storm. This was her opportunity. She approached Silas first, offering him sympathy and support. "Mr. Stone always spoke highly of you, Silas," she said, her voice soft and persuasive. "He trusted you more than anyone. I'm sure he would have wanted you to take over." She then subtly hinted at Mrs. Abernathy's precarious financial situation, suggesting that her claims were exaggerated and that Silas could easily challenge them in court. Next, she sought out Mrs. Abernathy, expressing her admiration for the landowner's business acumen. "Mr. Stone often said you were the smartest person he knew," Alara confided. She then subtly planted seeds of doubt about Silas's competence, suggesting he was too hot-headed and impulsive to manage the ranch effectively. She also mentioned Deuce Calhoun's reputation for cheating at cards, implying his claim was fraudulent. Finally, she approached Deuce Calhoun, feigning ignorance and seeking his protection. "Mr. Stone was a powerful man," she said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "I'm afraid of what will happen now that he's gone. I heard you were a close friend of his." She then subtly suggested that Silas and Mrs. Abernathy were plotting against him, trying to steal what was rightfully his. Alara's carefully crafted lies and subtle manipulations worked perfectly. Silas, Mrs. Abernathy, and Deuce Calhoun turned on each other, their greed and paranoia blinding them to Alara's machinations. They were so busy fighting amongst themselves that they didn't notice the quiet, unassuming woman who was pulling the strings. The chaos was her symphony, and she was the conductor. With Silas, Mrs. Abernathy, and Deuce Calhoun embroiled in their power struggle, Alara quietly began her campaign of blackmail. She started small, testing the waters, gauging their reactions. She approached Silas first, mentioning Stone's involvement in a cattle rustling scheme years ago, a scheme Silas had been deeply involved in. She didn't threaten him directly, but subtly suggested that the authorities might be interested in reopening the case. She offered him a solution. If he appointed her as his personal assistant, giving her access to the ranch's finances and operations, she would ensure that the information remained buried. Silas, terrified of facing prison, reluctantly agreed. Next, she targeted Mrs. Abernathy. Alara knew about Mrs. Abernathy's secret gambling debts and her desperate need for cash. She hinted that she possessed evidence of Mrs. Abernathy's financial troubles and that she could easily share this information with her creditors. She offered Mrs. Abernathy a deal. If she agreed to support Alara's decisions regarding the ranch's future, Alara would ensure that her debts remained secret. Mrs. Abernathy, desperate to protect her reputation, also caved. Deuce Calhoun was the trickiest. He was a hardened gambler and not easily intimidated. But Alara knew his weakness, his gambling addiction. She knew he'd cheated in a high-stakes poker game years ago, a game that had resulted in a man's death. She implied she knew the truth and would reveal it if he didn't back down from his claim on the ranch and support her decisions. Deuce, fearing for his life, had no choice but to comply. Piece by piece, Alara gained control. As Silas's assistant, she managed the ranch's finances, subtly siphoning off funds into a secret account. With Mrs. Abernathy's support, she influenced important decisions, ensuring they benefited her own agenda. And with Deuce Calhoun neutralized, she eliminated a major threat to her power. No one suspected her. They saw her as a simple ranch hand, an insignificant woman who posed no threat. But in reality, she was the puppet master, pulling the strings from the shadows. The ranch and the surrounding territory was slowly becoming hers, not through brute force or outright conquest, but through cunning, manipulation, and blackmail. Her reign had begun. Alara's ascent to power didn't go unnoticed. Whispers started circulating, fueled by suspicion and resentment. Some, particularly among the ranch hands who had known Stone for years, began to question the circumstances surrounding his death. Others, sensing her growing influence, sought to undermine her authority and seize control for themselves. One of her most persistent adversaries was a former deputy named Hank, a man who had always harbored ambitions of becoming sheriff. Hank had been a friend of Stone's and had never trusted Alara. He started digging into Stone's death, revisiting old leads, and questioning everyone on the ranch. He noticed the discrepancies in the stories, the subtle inconsistencies that suggested a cover-up. Hank confronted Alara directly, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You were awfully quick to rise to the top, Alara," he sneered. "Some folks are saying you had something to do with Stone's passing." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "That's a terrible accusation, Hank," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I was loyal to Mr. Stone. I would never do anything to harm him." But Alara knew she had to get rid of Hank, and fast. She couldn't afford to have him snooping around, uncovering the truth. She turned to his weakness, his ambition. She subtly spread rumors that the current sheriff was corrupt and that the town was looking for a replacement. She made sure Hank heard these rumors, knowing they would appeal to his ego. Then, she approached Hank with a proposition. "I hear the town needs a new sheriff, Hank," she said, feigning innocence. "I think you'd be perfect for the job. You're a good man, and you're respected in the community." She then offered to use her influence to help him secure the position, promising to rally support from key figures in town. Hank, blinded by his ambition, fell for the bait. He abandoned his investigation into Stone's death and focused all his energy on winning the sheriff's election. Alara, of course, had no intention of helping him. She subtly sabotaged his campaign, spreading rumors about his past and undermining his credibility. Hank lost the election in a landslide, his reputation ruined. He left town in disgrace, defeated and humiliated. Alara had once again used someone's greed against them, eliminating a threat and solidifying her control. The challenges kept coming, but Alara was always one step ahead, cleverly outmaneuvering her opponents and turning their own weaknesses against them. Years passed. Stone Creek transformed under Alara's subtle but firm hand. The ramshackle buildings were repaired, the fences were mended, and the livestock thrived. The ranch hands, once beaten and demoralized, now worked with a sense of purpose and loyalty. Alara had implemented fair wages, provided decent living conditions, and treated everyone with respect, earning their trust and admiration. Silas, Mrs. Abernathy, and Deuce Calhoun remained under her thumb, their power diminished, their secrets secure as long as they obeyed her. They became her enforcers, carrying out her orders and protecting her interests. They were her puppets, dancing to her tune. Alara never sought the spotlight. She preferred to operate from the shadows, influencing events from behind the scenes. She rarely gave direct orders, preferring to suggest courses of action, subtly guiding others to do her bidding. She became known as a shrewd negotiator, a fair arbitrator, and a woman who always got what she wanted. Her influence extended far beyond Stone Creek. She controlled the flow of cattle, the distribution of water, and the appointment of local officials. She had her fingers in every pie, her eyes on every transaction. She was the silent power broker of the region, the woman who made things happen. People whispered her name with a mixture of respect and fear. They knew she was not to be trifled with. They knew she possessed secrets that could ruin lives. They knew she was capable of anything. Alara had achieved her goal. She had avenged herself against Stone and conquered the Wild West, not with guns or violence, but with her intelligence, her charm, and her ruthlessness. She had transformed from a helpless victim into a powerful force, a woman who commanded respect and inspired fear. She was the queen of the shadows, and her reign had just begun. The underestimated woman had become the most powerful figure in the territory, all without anyone truly knowing the extent of her influence. Just when Alara believed she had secured her power, a new threat emerged. A sharp-witted journalist from a big city newspaper named Isabella Moreau arrived in town, sniffing around for a story. Isabella was ambitious, tenacious, and incorruptible. She had heard whispers about Stone's mysterious death and Alara's sudden rise to power, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Isabella started interviewing people, digging into old records, and piecing together the puzzle. She was smart, resourceful, and she quickly realized that something was amiss. She suspected Alara was involved in Stone's death, and that she was controlling the town through manipulation and blackmail. Isabella confronted Alara, her eyes blazing with determination. "I know what you did, Alara," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. I know you killed Stone, and I know you're running this town like a puppet show. I'm going to expose you. Alara knew this was her most dangerous adversary yet. Isabella couldn't be bought, intimidated, or manipulated. She was driven by a thirst for truth, and she wouldn't stop until she had uncovered it. Alara decided to use a different tactic. She invited Isabella to her ranch, offering her a rare and exclusive interview. She spoke candidly about her past, her struggles, and her vision for the future of the town. She painted herself as a survivor, a woman who had overcome adversity and was now working to make the world a better place. She also subtly hinted at the corruption and greed of the town's other leaders, suggesting that Isabella's investigative skills could be better used to expose their wrongdoings. She presented Isabella with a choice: expose Alara's past, or help her clean up the town and build a brighter future. Isabella was torn. She still suspected Alara was guilty of Stone's death, but she also recognized the good Alara had done for the town. She saw the potential for positive change, and she realized that exposing Alara might do more harm than good. In the end, Isabella made a difficult decision. She chose to focus on the corruption of the other leaders, using her investigative skills to expose their crimes and bring them to justice. She wrote a series of articles that praised Alara's leadership and highlighted her efforts to improve the town. Alara had once again outmaneuvered her opponent, using her charm, wit, and understanding of human nature to turn a threat into an ally. She had passed her final test, solidifying her control and securing her legacy. The Queen of the Shadows had prevailed. Years later, Alara sat on the porch of her sprawling ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Stone Creek was now a thriving community, a testament to her leadership and vision. She had transformed it from a place of fear and oppression into a place of opportunity and prosperity. She had achieved her revenge. Jedediah Stone was gone, his cruelty replaced by her compassion. She had taken control of the Wild West, not through violence or conquest, but through intelligence, charm, and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive. But the cost had been high. She had sacrificed her innocence, her dreams, and her peace of mind. She had become a manipulator, a liar, and a killer. She had walked a dark path, and she knew she would never be able to fully escape its shadows. Sometimes, at night, she would dream of the books she had once longed to read, the faraway cities she had dreamed of visiting. She would wonder what her life would have been like if fate had been kinder. But those dreams were fleeting, quickly replaced by the reality of her present. She looked out at the vast expanse of land that she now controlled. She had created a new order, a world where justice prevailed, where the weak were protected, and where everyone had a chance to succeed. She had brought stability and prosperity to a lawless land, and in that, she found a measure of satisfaction. She had used her power for good, to uplift others and to create a better world. She had turned her pain into purpose, her suffering into strength. The Wild West was now subtly ruled by a woman no one ever expected. A woman who had been bought like cattle, but who had risen to become a queen. A woman who had been underestimated, but who had proven to be smarter, stronger, and more ruthless than anyone could have imagined. Alara smiled, a faint, knowing smile. Her journey had been long and arduous, but she had finally reached her destination. The Wild West was hers, and she would rule it wisely, justly, and from the shadows. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, the shadows of a queen.